Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marissa Chun, and on behalf of PPIC's Board of Directors, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to our program today. PPIC is thrilled to present this program featuring our Attorney General, Xavier Becerra, in conversation with PPIC's President, Mark Baldassare. Attorney General Becerra, thank you so much for joining us here in your hometown today. It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
Mark will touch upon the Attorney General's distinguished record of public service, but I did want to note that the Attorney General is also a man of many hidden talents. Our mutual friends tell me that he is a top-notch golfer and a poker player to boot. Now, I understand that he doesn't have time for such activities these days, although I suspect that he would reconsider if perhaps the president invited him to play 18 holes of golf. Now, that would be quite a conversation. This event is part of PPIC's 2017 Speaker Series on California's future. We would like to thank the sponsors of this series for their generous underwriting support. These organizations are listed on the screens to my left and to my right and on the back of your programs. This series is also funded by PPIC's Donor Circle and our Corporate Circle, individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. Funding from our sponsors and donors make valuable civic discourse like today's program possible and make it possible to ensure that they remain free and open to the public, both in person and online on our website. So before we begin, 2 housekeeping items. First, we would ask that when you later today receive an emailed survey, that you take a moment to fill it out and tell us how we did. Here at PPIC, we're always striving to improve what we do every day. Second, we would ask that you please take a moment to silence your cell phones out of courtesy to our speakers. Now it's time to get the conversation started. I'd like to turn things over to PPIC's President, Mark Baldassare.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments, Marissa. Attorney General, a pleasure to have you here for this conversation today. We had a lot of interest in hearing from you, and it's my job to have for the next half hour or so a conversation, and then we're going to have some question and answer from the audience because I'm sure people came here with some interesting questions as well. I just want to briefly add to the biography that Marissa provided and talk about some of your distinguished accomplishments and how it is that we got here today. You had served in the Congress since 1992, and you served the district in downtown Los Angeles during that time, had a lot of important positions both within committees and the caucus, and have represented California from the Washington perspective for many, many years, roughly 24. Before that, you served in the state legislature for 1 term. And before that, you worked actually for the California Attorney General as Deputy Attorney General in the late 1980s. And you graduated from Stanford and also went to Stanford Law and graduated from there also, born and raised in Sacramento. And so welcome home.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
And on January 24th of this year, which seems like a long time ago, because so many things have happened this year, and we get to talk about what's really focus on what's happened and how California is responding. You were sworn in on January 24th as the 33rd Attorney General of California, the first Latino Attorney General in California's history. And that was, of course, that came about as a result of our Attorney General who ran for the Senate seat, winning the Senate seat, and then Governor Brown nominated you, called you, and you accepted, and the nomination went forward, then sworn in early this year. So I've been reading all about the many, many things that you've been doing, and I thought we would start the conversation, give you a chance to look at the time that you've been in office so far and talk about what you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities that you're facing as Attorney General of California today.
Well, thanks, Mark. If I could begin by just saying to you and to PPIC, to Marissa as well, thank you very much. I hope everyone is supporting PPIC because we need these types of conversations to exist all the time. And
thank you.
Sometimes they're the only place that you can have these civil conversations occur, and I think it's great that you do this. And so I hope everyone does support PPIC aggressively. Secondly, it's a little intimidating because I understand we may talk a little bit about healthcare, and you got Diana Dooley, the person who probably knows more about healthcare in California than about anybody I know, and someone I've had the pleasure of working with on so many occasions, and I deeply respect the work that she's done as the point for Governor Brown on so many healthcare issues. And then I have to point out, Karen Skelton Leave, my buddy from high school, C.K. McClatchy High School. I just delivered the commencement address at the McClatchy graduation ceremonies on Friday, and it was a thrill because it'd been about 40 years since I'd been back to McClatchy since I had left. So, Mark, if I could just tell you by beginning,
sure.
In terms of challenges, let's put it this way. I'm sitting here talking to you. There's another Attorney General in D.C. sitting down talking to some other folks. I'm having a better time than he is. You know, I say this sincerely. Maybe it's that I'm getting old, or maybe it's just that I'm enjoying my life. But I see challenges as just another reason to get up in the morning and go to work. And I am having a great time. I am thrilled to be where I am. I know you didn't expect me to be here. I didn't expect to be here. So let's have fun doing it.
Thank you. What areas have you been focused on the most?
Oh gosh, I've got Melanie Fontes-Rayner from my office, who's here, who does mostly my healthcare. She's got this list, and we finally started compiling a list because people would ask, well, why weren't you the first one to sue here? Or why aren't you already in here and doing? And I'd probably say the most active place we've been is in the environment. We have been involved in initiating litigation, especially in regards to energy efficiency standards. We have initiated an action to get public documents out of Administrator Pruitt at EPA to find out if he's respecting the conflict of interest laws that require him to recuse himself, if he is engaged in actions that would be a conflict based on his prior associations with stakeholders who he's now supposed to regulate. We have been at the forefront in saying that we're not turning back the clock when it comes to climate change, and we are moving forward with the Paris Accords to the degree that the state of California can. I've got the governor's back on anything he wants to do on the environment. We're looking at any number of matters where we are either in by filing an action in court, we've joined an action, or we're contemplating an action. And so we're going to be very, very active on the environmental front and climate change. Healthcare, we initiated a lawsuit where we are trying to intervene on behalf of the people of the country and certainly in California to protect the Affordable Care Act, because we're deadly afraid that the administration, which is supposed to be defending this lawsuit that was initiated by House Republicans a few years ago to undermine the subsidies that people depend on in order to afford their health insurance under the Affordable Care Act. We want to make sure that there is somebody who actually wants to defend the law, and so we're asking the court to let us intervene on behalf of the Affordable Care Act in a case called House of Representatives versus Price. It used to be Burwell when Secretary Burwell was the head of HHS. Now that Secretary Price, Tom Price, is now the head of HHS, it's now House versus Price, and we're hoping that the courts will allow California, and there's about 17 other states attorneys general who are trying to intervene to defend the Affordable Care Act. Criminal justice, we're getting ready to launch regulations to allow us to move forward on legislation to make sure that we're dealing with the issue of racial profiling by law enforcement agencies. We are in the process of helping reform the Cal gang system, which lets us track members who may be part of gangs. We're doing everything we can to enforce public safety laws and do so without separating families, immigrant families in this country, and making sure local law enforcement can focus on public safety, not on the business of deportation. Consumer protection, we have filed a number of actions against a number of stakeholders who have defrauded the people of the state or who are exploiting the people of the state when it comes to products and services. We recently got a 5-year conviction on a gentleman who was defrauding immigrant families by portraying himself as able to get these families services that he could not. I can go through that. We're busy. We're busy, and it's a good busy. It's
Good.
A really good busy.
Well, with so many issues and things changing so fast this year, how do you go about setting the priorities in the Attorney General's office?
Much of what we're doing and I'm doing is what the talented people of the Department of Justice in California have been doing all the time. We are protecting the people. Our attorneys, 1,100 strong, are out there in force, representing the state in matters where necessary to protect our interests. But we've initiated a number of actions. I have brought in a team of about 6 or 7 individuals who are my special assistants, like Melanie on healthcare. I have someone on healthcare, criminal justice reform, the environment, immigration. The state of California, the Department of Justice has never had a section that deals with immigration per se, because we have no jurisdiction over immigration law directly. But I brought in someone who is an expert on immigration simply because we are doing so much on immigration. My first actions, in fact, as the Attorney General, had to do with the President's unconstitutional actions, executive actions on the Muslim travel ban and sanctuary jurisdiction attacks. And so we're coordinating our activities. Principally, my Civil Rights Division enforcement folks were taking that on, and now I've got someone who actually is an expert on immigration helping coordinate that. So we've got a number of folks who are dealing with this. Consumer protection is another area, so about 5 or 6 areas where we are concentrating, and all that work is for the purpose of making sure we're continuing with our mission to protect the people. I would say that my top priorities, again, environment is big because the federal government has decided to go back to the 19th century when it comes to climate change, and we want to keep moving forward in the 21st century. Immigration simply by force, and as a son of immigrants, I'm going to take that on. And healthcare, there's nothing perhaps more immediate than the attacks on the healthcare plans that now so many Americans, not just Californians, depend on. The days when you used to go bankrupt simply because you took your child to the doctor or hospital evaporated once we had the Affordable Care Act. Those days could come back, and so we're trying to be on top of those as much as we can.
And while you're trying to be on top of the environment, and especially, and we've seen the governor moving aggressively in that direction for many years, but especially now in relation to the Paris Accord, the legislature is also looking to make its impact on the new policy arena. So on the environment, the legislature is looking at the cap and trade bill. They're looking at 100% renewables. How important are those legislative activities to the activities that you're involved in?
They're crucial because they give us the underpinning that I can use to defend the actions of the state. Even though the federal government is trying to roll back some of those advances and protections, so long as we have them in place at the state level, we can continue to move forward. That also pressures the federal government from trying to abandon its agreements with the state that allow us to move forward in ways that go beyond what federal law requires. And so it's critical. And the other difference is just optics. And in terms of the passions that we have, I left a place where for years we'd been trying to enact a law that would say that if someone wants to buy a weapon, a firearm from a gun shop, you'd have to go through a background check. In California, you're probably wondering, well, why do you want to do that? That's already in place, because in California, we've had that law for, 15, 20 years. At the federal level, we can't get that enacted. That's how backward we are at the federal level, that you can still go into some gun shops throughout the country, never have to show deep background to find out if you should be able to buy a weapon, and you can walk out with an assault weapon. And in California, we've gone so far beyond that. And so it is a night and day difference to see what we can accomplish, because we have a legislature and legislative leaders and a governor who are very forward-leaning. And so it's a thrill. After 24 years, only 6 of them in the majority in the House of Representatives, to actually get to do stuff, because I've got a legislature and a governor that are pushing me to be out there.
So that's in the environment. In the area of health care, the legislature has also been very active, obviously very concerned about maintaining access to affordable health care, and perhaps even finding ways to expand it. You've been involved in the lawsuit that will, that has to do with the insurance subsidies, the millions of people on Medi-Cal, and then millions of people who don't have any health care today. Some people in the legislature suggesting that single payer is the answer. What do you think?
When I got elected in 1990 to the State Assembly, I became a sponsor of single-payer legislation here. I was a sponsor of single-payer legislation in Congress as well. I think it's the way to go, because it takes away the efficiencies in a system that I think has turned health care for people into a commodity. I don't think whether your son or daughter needs to go to a doctor or a hospital should depend on how much money you have in your pocket. We got away from that when it came to, thank you. We pivoted away from that type of philosophy when it came to water, electricity, mail service, education. We considered all those universally required obligations of our government to try to provide people to have the underpinnings you need to have a civilized society. Why is healthcare not among those, when we know that if you can't be nourished, ready to learn, healthy, and ready to work, it's going to be tough for you to succeed, and not just for you, but for everybody around you. And so to me, healthcare should not be treated like a commodity where you price it and the highest bidder gets to offer you services, and if you don't have money, you're out of luck. The Affordable Care Act was an attempt to address that, and I think it did a pretty good job, but you can see the efficiencies even in the inefficiencies in the Affordable Care Act. It's where the will of the people will take you. I hope California gets further along in recognizing that affordability comes only when you have universality, and that you have to be able to access the services. And it makes it really difficult for Diana Dooley and the team that she has to make sure that health care is prevalent for everyone, and that you don't have some disease hit neighborhoods because some kids aren't immunized, or because some parents can't afford to take their kids into the doctor early enough. And it requires all of us to participate. But whether or not we can get single payer this year, I think eventually the public will become fed up with a system that's driven too much by commoditizing the notion of healthcare.
Coming back to the issue of immigration, you have been very active in protecting the rights of undocumented immigrants in California. And many people in the legislature and elsewhere want to know, given increased federal immigration enforcement, exactly what can the state do? And some people believe that a sanctuary state bill is the answer. And I'd like to get your thoughts on what the state can do. You alluded to this earlier about this is earlier, Attorney General didn't deal with the issue, but you have to deal with the issue. So what does the state do?
So I always start on immigration with the premise that no law of man trumps the law of nature. And so people will always look for a way to make sure they take care of their kids. And so long as they have the power, the willpower to find a better way of life for their children, they will find it. They'll go wherever so long as they can walk there, run there, travel there, they will go somewhere where it provides a better chance of life for their family. No artificial law created by mostly men, but men and women. Yeah, I'm pretty down on my own gender sometimes. Will supersede that law of nature. At the same time, the second premise that I think really undergirds this whole notion of immigration is the fact that in America, we've been tangoing with immigrants for a long time. It takes two to tango. No immigrant comes here without documents, without some knowledge that they're going to be able to accomplish that natural law of providing something better to the family. And so if there's no job on the horizon, there's no way to make a living, you're not going to come here. It's too far a trek. It's too expensive. It's too dangerous. You do it because you know at the end of the day, someone's willing to hire you. And so America's been tangoing with immigrants for a long time. And so we should stop acting like the guy in Casablanca. I'm shocked. And so understanding that those two premises, law of nature, and we've been tangoing, then let's come to a solution and be pragmatic about it. And this is where I think the business community is going to help us solve this, because I think the business community has to be pragmatic in the way it addresses most issues. So it's not out of heart or guts. It's going to be because up here we understand that it's not going to be good for our state and our economy if we don't get a grip on this. And I would say in terms of what we can do as a state, what we can do is just make sure that to the degree that we have power under the law to guide our state, we treat people who come to this country, because we're tangoing with them, we treat them like human beings. So if you work hard, you should not have to worry about starving or your kids starving. If you have children, they should have access to education, because we decided a while ago that education is a universal right. And so the fact that you're undocumented is an artifice of federal law that's been unchanged and a system that's broken. But too many, even in federal government, have tangoed against the law with immigrants. And for them to get out there and be mightier, holier than thou on this is outrageous. And so at the end of the day, I know when I meet my maker, he or she, probably she, is going to be more proud of the fact that I was willing to stand up for people, not for undocumented immigrants.
Will the sanctuary state bill be something that you would support?
So long as we allow public safety to be done, and I think this is where our law enforcement personnel have a legitimate point to make, and that is we have to work with everyone to make sure that you're safe. And so if someone's trying to bring drugs into the country, we got to work with whomever we can officially, appropriately, to make sure those drugs don't come in. If someone is trying to get your teenage daughter and have her go out on the streets and become part of the sex trafficking that's occurring to too many families, we got to go after those folks. And we can't do something that undermines the ability of our police and sheriff and law enforcement fighters from being able to do that. And so long as we don't undermine the ability of local law enforcement to do public safety, then we should do everything else to make sure we are walling off the ability of an aggressive Federal Immigration Enforcement Authority to try to have us do their bidding. And there's where I think there is some value in coming up with a law that would make it clear that we're not going to do more than what we have to make sure that we're providing for the public safety. So if DEA or FBI or ICE or CPB want us to do something with them, so long as it's for public safety, not to go after the woman going to the grocery store to buy food for the family coming home, or for the father going to school to go pick up his daughter. We're not interested in those latter activities, but if we're there to do joint interdiction of drugs, that kind of stuff, absolutely, let's go all at it together. And I think there's a proper way to come up with a law that allows the two to be separated.
So maybe this is a good time to ask you what areas you've found common ground with the Trump administration at this point, and what areas in which, where do you work with the federal government, and how do you work? Where do you think the opportunities are?
I think trying to think of it's going to be longer than my answer. No, I'll be honest. Most folks don't recognize this, but the Department of Justice, California Department of Justice, has one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the country. We've got about 1,000 officers, sworn peace officers, and we do a lot of work with our federal partners, including ICE and CPB, Customs and Border Patrol. And so we're doing that every day. And it's some of the activities I mentioned. It's the surveillance that's done on gangs. It's the work that we do for local governments that don't have the resources to do wiretaps and so forth. So we do a lot of that work in conjunction with our federal partners. So we do it all the time. We'll continue to work with our federal partners way more than you'll ever know. What you hear about is the cases where we're not working well together. And I would say it's not that we're not working well with them. We're continuing to do what we've done. It's that they're drawn back and trying to do something differently. So, for example, when it comes to light bulbs, we're moving towards energy efficient light bulbs. It's a given. We're going there. Now EPA is saying, well, we don't want to do that anymore. You can't just say no. You've got a whole bunch of industries. You got a whole bunch of people who've invested in going forward with energy efficient light bulbs. So you have to follow a process to undo that. They didn't want to do that. They just wanted to say no. So we're not working with them on that. We're contesting what they're doing on that, on ceiling fans, on air conditioning units, all these things that are now becoming more efficient. They want to challenge the status of the sequoias as a national monument. No. I mean, come on. Come on. And so it's not that we're against them. It's that we're not willing to turn back the clock. And I think history is going to judge very harshly some of these actions. But we don't have time for this to become history. Right now we got a lot of work to do, and we'll work with whomever wants to work with us. I keep saying, look, I'm not out there to pick a fight, but you want to bring one? I'm ready. I mean, we're...
So next year is 2018. Are you going to be running for Attorney General?
Yeah, can you tell whoever is saying that I'm not, that's a false rumor. I am running for election as the Attorney General for the state of California, and I'm loving this, so...
okay.
Yes.
So you're running now? Yes. And this will be your first time running for statewide office, and you've got a lot of things on your plate. So I'm wondering how are you going to approach running for office, this being your first time, and then you've got all these things on your plate. How do you see this? What should we be looking for?
Well, I'm accustomed to running all over the country in a campaign, so running all over the state will be fun. I figure the best mark of your value in getting a vote is what you've done. I always tell people, if you want to know where I'm going to take you, just look at where I've come from. And so I hope that over these 18, 20, 24 months that I'm in the position that I can show people where I come from. And I hope people look beyond those 24 months or so and to see where I've come from over the course of my life. And if I can earn a vote and raise about $15 million, I think I have a chance of getting reelected or elected.
So when the governor called you to be Attorney General and he asked you, can you take us back to that moment, what you were thinking and how you made the decision to say yes instead of you had just been reelected to Congress?
Yeah. You'd
been there for a long time. You had a lot of power, a lot of influence there.
Yeah, this is fun. It all cooked in essentially 48, 72 hours. I look back at it fondly because, as I said, I didn't expect it to happen. And so it was really interesting. You have to go back to that time. I had just gotten reelected. I was chair of the House Democrats in Congress, so I was the fourth-ranking Democrat. I had done a lot of work for Hillary Clinton in the campaign, and I fully expected that my future was still in Washington, D.C., so much so that it wasn't until about a week and a half ago that my wife got to leave D.C. and join me here in California after I'd been here for several months, because she was, as an OBGYN, perinatologist, she was still stuck in D.C. in a contract. It just happened that as I thought about this, it really did pique my interest that maybe this would be something I should consider. And I give Nancy Pelosi credit for this, because Nancy's the one that had come to me and said, have you thought about the Attorney General position now that Kamala's going to move on to the Senate? And I said, Nancy, I was hoping to, at some point when Nancy moved on, I'd have a chance to replace Nancy. So I thought about it a little bit, and I thought, you know what, this is going to be different. It'd be nice to go back to the office where I worked back in the 1980s, late 1980s. And so I put in the call to the governor right before Thanksgiving, Wednesday, right before Thanksgiving. We didn't actually start talking until, I think it was that Sunday or Monday. It sort of all gets convoluted now, but that Monday or so, by Tuesday night, the decision, or Wednesday night, the decision had been made. We'd had several conversations back and forth. In the interim, I found out news in Washington that I had not expected. I was on the Ways and Means Committee, which is a really good committee to be on in the House, and the ranking Democrat on the committee was beginning to send out some rumors that he might not vie for that position again, which would mean whoever got it would be in a position to be the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which is it's a badass committee, let's put it that way.
Big deal.
My daughter, Natalia's here, she's probably saying, oh, my dad just used a word he never lets us use. And so I told Nancy McFadden, who I was talking to as well, Nancy, things have changed. I need to know quickly now, because if it's true that Sandy Levin, congressman from Michigan, is not going to vie to be the ranking Democrat, I've got to jump. And she said, well, we'll see what we can do. Try to get a hold of the governor. Meanwhile, Sandy Levin did decline to run for the ranking position, and immediately I jumped in. And that was in the late afternoon. By that night, I had already collected half the votes I needed to become the next ranking Democrat on the committee. And so I was desperate. I said, Nancy, I'm in this thing. Unless the governor and I are talking, I'm committed. You can't ask people for a vote at the expense of your colleague who's also running against you, and then all of a sudden I shame them by saying I'm leaving, and now they have to go face the person who's going to become the next ranking Democrat. So governor and I ended up having conversation, and by that evening, he'd offered the position, and I quickly accepted. And so it was, my wife didn't believe it. But it's a great turn. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, good, good. You made a good choice.
I think so.
And good choice for California. So let's take some questions. Thank you, thank you. Let's take some questions. Who's got a hand up?
Over here.
One over here. And the shorter the questions, more questions we can ask, so let's keep the questions brief.
Name is Jeff Tartagia. Single payer, what do you expect to be in California, should we say, the issues that are going to be brought against it?
Taxes.
Taxes.
That's it's always the issue. But if you take a look at it, if you were to balance out the taxes that are instituted to try to collect the monies to pay for the services, it's less actually than right now people pay out of pocket for their health care through insurance or their copay. Everything you pay for health care would on balance be less at the end of the day under a single payer system, but it looks big because it's now on your paycheck or coming out of your when you file your tax return. But at the end of the day, it's less. And that's because you're extracting all the inefficiencies in the system. You could do healthcare without doing single payer. It just costs a little bit more because you have more players involved. And like anything else, whether it's from wholesale to retailing, you've got a whole bunch of middle people in between, it's just going to cost a little bit more because everybody takes a little bit of money.
Mm-hmm. Other question? Yes.
Thank you so much. Hi. Thank you. I know Jeff Sessions is requesting Congress to give him permission to prosecute the medical marijuana providers. What is your opinion on that, and what do you plan to do about that?
Yeah.
Jeff Sessions should worry about his own problems before he tries to go after folks who want to use marijuana for medical purposes or even recreational purposes. We've turned the corner on this. Mm-hmm. I think the hearts and will of most Americans today is not to criminalize cannabis, but to regulate it. And I think that's the wise decision. There are a lot of things the federal government should do. One of them is not descend on states that have passed their own regulatory scheme mm-hmm. to try to determine how to best deal with the issue of marijuana. Because it's going to be there. It's just whether it's done illicitly and criminally or whether it's done regulated above board where we monitor it and it's more transparent. And so they're not going to do this. The politics behind this are way beyond them now. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, it's not a left or right, R or D issue. You try to go after folks who want to do medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, whether in Colorado or California, get ready. They're intense.
Question over here.
Thank you for your environmental leadership and your protections for consumers and work prosecuting fraud. I would like to know if you're considering any lawsuits against Exxon or any other major oil companies for their misleading statements and potential fraudulent claims against consumers in the state of California and the expenses imposed on California taxpayer as a result.
And so I'm going to try to give you as much as I can give you on this because the longstanding practice in the Department of Justice has been to not comment on any investigations, ongoing, concluded, or otherwise. And so I'm very aware of that particular issue. We are looking at a number of things, and in the case of the Exxon matter, it's as much a securities fraud, perhaps, issue as it is an environmental issue. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at a number of things involving a number of different industries. And at some point, we may do something publicly on any number of issues we're working on, which would telegraph where we are, but I can't comment on any particular activity or investigation we're involved in, but I'm very much aware of the circumstances relating to the Exxon Mobil case.
Good answer. Yes, over here. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you for protecting the human rights of all Californians. Thank you for securing our communities. Thank you for looking towards the safety of all families in California.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Liliana Ferrer, I'm the new Consul General of Mexico, and I've been here three weeks. I've been a Foreign Service officer for over 25 years, mostly posted in the United States. I'm coming from France, but I just want to end by saying that it's a true honor and privilege to be posted in Sacramento, the political capital of such a wonderful state and a wonderful strategic partner of Mexico. I very much look forward into strengthening our ties in all areas. Economically, we're the #1 partner of California. Our exports go to Mexico. We're the #1 buyer, and I look towards working in that end in the business community and also in the human rights and climate change. The Paris Accord is yet another thing that we share common values in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So normally I ask, what's the question? But in this case, I'll make an exception. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Consul General.
is there anything you want to add?
Other than I've been very fortunate to work with some great ambassadors and consul general from Mexico on the issue of immigration. I know the consul general from her days when she was in Washington, D.C., and I'm thrilled that she's now here in California and in Sacramento, and I look forward to working with her. I think Mexico has evolved when it's come to how it deals with the Mexican nationals who are in the U.S. without documents in a way that I think has become very constructive and helpful to the efforts that we're making here to try to address the issue of undocumented immigration. And I thank her and the government of Mexico for trying to figure out ways to help us. Before, there was always this tension that Mexico would treat its nationals as Mexican citizens that it wanted back, or wasn't sure if they should be considered people who would now stay in the U.S. or another country. And I think now the attitude has been for quite some time now by the Mexican government and succeeding political parties in office in the presidency to treat the Mexicans who've come or the diaspora as people who have rights, period, and trying to work with the governments where they are located now to respect the rights of those individual Mexicans as human beings.
Thank you. Another question from this side of the room? Nobody on this side of the room? There's one right here? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes? We have two questions going at once, or? Oh, okay, yes. Right.
Yes, Mr. Attorney General, what can you do to help facilitate small and medium-sized law enforcement agencies getting body cams and car cams, which have shown to be very useful in building better relationships between our communities and law enforcement?
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best thing I could tell you there is to try to help push the legislature to make those resources available. There's a real challenge for the small and medium-sized law enforcement agencies. In fact, that's as I mentioned earlier, much of the work that my law enforcement arm does is it helps mostly the small and medium-sized counties that aren't able to afford the different resources, whether it's forensics, the DNA and fingerprint testing that occurs, or whether it's the investigations, wiretapping, surveillance that needs to be done. And so when it comes to body cams, I will tell you that probably most of the law enforcement agencies will tell you, we just need resources. And it's not just the purchase of the equipment. The real cost is maintaining the data and the storing all of that video and information that you have. That's what starts to become a real cost.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Question over here.
Sergio Aguilar Gaxiola, UC Davis School of Medicine and the California Healthcare Foundation. Question has to do with DACA students. You know,
DACA.
we continue to experience quite a bit of fear and uncertainty, not only from the students, especially from the families. And I know that there is commitment here. This is like an island nationwide because of the commitment to these families and the students themselves. And I know that this is a group that is important to you and to California. But I would love to hear from you what protections California can offer, you know, if this uncertainty continues.
And as I try to answer, we really are limited because we can't change the immigration status of any individual. We can only offer protections that we offer to any Californian when it comes to public safety or privacy. So one of the efforts in making sure that DMV records or college or high school records are not accessed by authorities for purposes unrelated to the educational purposes they were collected, we can try to do those things to contain that information and protect those individuals' privacy. But in terms of a direct support or protection based on their immigration status, we can do very, very little. And so that's what makes it difficult. I remember the day that, I think it was December 2010, right after the November 2010 elections where Democrats in the House lost control of the House. We got swamped. We met with President Obama, a small group of us, about, well, what do we do? Because we thought we were going to come close to being able to do an immigration bill. And that's when I suggested to Mr. President, you have authority to do some things without waiting for Congress. You have discretion. And I used the example of TPS, temporary protected status that had been granted by previous presidents in the past through executive order, allowing constituencies from particular countries to remain for purposes that were to support those countries from where the people came. So in case of El Salvador, they were in the process of a civil war, and to send people back who were undocumented would have been a great burden for the country that was trying to reconcile its civil war. Nicaragua, when they had the earthquakes and the mudslides that were devastating, we also provided TPS for them. And so I said, you have the ability through your executive powers. It took a few years, but ultimately the president came out with DACA. And I give Barack Obama tremendous credit for what he did using his executive power. But in terms of what we can do in California as California leaders, it's much more limited, and that's why we need to have sanity in Washington, D.C.
Let me ask you one final question, and I know we're out of time, but earlier you said that you felt that there were some opportunities in terms of working with the business community, and I know that I've been watching what you've been doing, and you've been reaching out to the business community around the issue of immigration. How do you see that working? Clearly, you've spent time in Washington, and now you're here, and you're seeing some connection that maybe we haven't seen before. So, tell us about that.
So, I've learned that you can have passion and great ideas, but if you don't know how to actually translate that into accomplishments, you get nothing. And so, to me, the business community doesn't have a choice but to deliver. They have to produce. Many of us can get out there and pontificate and talk about our values and our ideals, but at the end of the day, single payer is not going to be a reality unless we figure out a pragmatic way to implement it. And that's where I think the business community, especially in California, deserves a great deal of credit, because California is a challenging place. Rightfully so. We're a desert for the most part. We don't have a whole bunch of water. Our atmospheric conditions make it tough on air pollution. We're 40 million in a place that we're a big state, but still we're pockets. So the business community has to figure out how to thread the needle to succeed. And by the way, we have, as I mentioned before, we created more jobs in this state than any other. And so that to me is great pragmatism, delivering the goods. And in that, I give a great deal of credit to the business community. But here's, if I could, Mark, just make a point here. I've also learned a few things too. You shouldn't get to take advantage simply because you figured out that way to thread the needle in ways that don't do the greater good. So for example, I met with growers in the Central Valley early on after I'd been confirmed. They're very concerned about immigration under the Trump administration because growers probably have the largest number of undocumented in their workforce of any particular industry. So they were concerned, but I said, well, you know, your own legislators, your own members of Congress from your region don't support an immigration reform. Yeah, we know, we're not too happy about that. And I said, well, you know, unless you all help us, it's going to be difficult for all of us. And then I said, and I do want you to know, as the Attorney General for the state, I don't forget what federal law says on a number of matters that I worked on. And oftentimes, growers have relied on guest worker programs. Many people will remember the bracero program from the 1940s and 50s. I said, I hope you understand that in order for you to bring in a guest worker, should you lose some of your workers who may get detained and deported as a result of not having documents, that you should think twice that it's going to be real easy to just now import workers under a guest worker program, an H-2A guest worker program, because you've lost the people you need. Because under the law, you must prove that there's no American ready and willing to take that job. And if I recall correctly, in the Central Valley, you still have unemployment rates that are double what it is in most of the rest of the state. My job is to enforce the law and to protect the people. If you think that it's okay for you to abandon these people that have been working very hard in your fields, picking crops, simply because it's easier not to get in the way of the Trump ICE force, and then just go out and try to apply to the Trump administration to get H-2A workers to be parachuted in, imported in to do the work, think twice. Because I think it's up to you, because I said before, I think the business community really drives so many of these things. It's up to you to stand up. Stand up for these folks who are skilled workers, who've made you a profitable enterprise, and who've been able to feed the world. Because if you don't stand up for them, who will? And if you don't, I'm going to watch to see who you try to hire, to make sure that if you wish to bring in somebody else who's not from this country, but this time has a document which temporarily allows them to come work here, I'm going to make sure I bring to you a number of Americans who are out of work. And so let's be pragmatic about this. Stand up for the folks who make you succeed so we can get this done, because you are valuable players in getting us immigration reform. And so I think the business community can take us in so many good directions. I don't like when the business community doesn't take on its responsibility to do it for all of us. And as I said to the California Chamber the other day, I'm failing if the next time I see someone from the business community is in court. They're failing if the next time they see me is in court. I opened the door, I said, I invite you to come visit me anytime you want, because we should be seeing each other in my office, in your office, out there where you're doing your business. But if we're seeing each other in court, then we're not doing our work right.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, thank you. Great. Thank you, Attorney General Becerra. Thank you, Marissa. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks for all of you for joining us for lunch today. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. This was fantastic.